meditation.
Okay. I can cut the beginning.
Honestly, meditation honestly has been the biggest recharge, because it just, rewires everything, honestly.
Mm.
I could be too much in my mind. I could be overwhelmed. I could be, thinking maybe I don't have enough strength. But a few minutes of meditation, it starts, changing how I see myself. Um, and everything else is, helps, like poetry, music, movies, walking. But if I don't meditate and do everything else, they start to feel very, cringy. They don't work out well for me.
Mm.
If I meditate and do everything else, then it works out well.
Have you meditated today?
I did.
Good.
Before this call, I wanted to just have myself in my complete element so that I can be really available for you. And I felt so bad, honestly, because I know you have been so sweet, and you would text me, after like, few weeks, that can we do this? And I'm it's not my strength, as you can see, to schedule stuff, not my strength at all. It's very, challenging, but I was like, what, whatever it takes, I'm going to do this before this month
Oh,
ends. Yeah.
I'm
So I'm so
really
happy.
grateful,
I'm
and
very happy
like
to be doing this. Yeah.
I'm kind of like, I go with the flow. And sometimes, from the beginning, when I actually first asked you the podcast, I think the topics and everything, like so many things have changed. So I was always like, okay, it's
Right.
not happening now. Like it's going to be the perfect, timing for, and then you started actually doing your podcast, and many of the things that I wanted to ask, you answered there and you answered somewhere else. So it's been good, like it's out there. So anyways, it's like, it's great
Right.
you're doing. I love your podcast. I've been in a rush a little bit as well. I haven't listened to like all latest episodes, but I saw
That's
some glimpse.
fine.
Did you record the one on spiritual teachers?
It's going to happen today. Fingers
Okay.
crossed. Yeah. It's such a overwhelming episode, to be honest, because, um, I asked people to send their questions. So they
Mm-hmm.
sent a lot of questions. They are about, different modern teachers, old teachers, and they want to know some spicy stuff, and they want to know my personal opinion on them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to share everything in 20 to 30 minutes. I don't want
Oh
to,
yeah.
go overboard. But yeah, I'm actually looking forward to what will come out as I start talking. The teachers I deeply respect, they are not on social media. They are like the aloof teachers sitting in the jungles. But there are certain teachers in the public, platform, who are really out there, and I want to be extremely respectful to all the work they have
Mm.
done. And I don't want to throw my personal opinion, oh, because he used to smoke, so he's a bad teacher. That's where people are stuck. People want to see the
Yeah.
teachers in a one dimension, and that's never going to work out.
Because that's like I typed that question for you on the Instagram story, but actually if we're here, and if I might ask, because that's my
Oh,
concern always about, like big teachers. And okay, let's take Osho for example. For me, like the
yeah.
teachings, the books, the lectures, whatever is there, it's amazing. Some of it, like you start practicing, maybe it doesn't work out, maybe it works out. But what I see often, what I hear from people when you mention the word Osho, is like, oh, but he had Rolls Royces. And what do you see? It's like
Right.
the teaching and the person. Like I see it very separate. I'm like, this is the teaching, I can take
Yeah,
whatever I
me
want
too.
from this, and see
Me
if
too.
it works or not. And okay, that's his personality. He loved Rolls Royces or
Yeah.
whatever.
That's such a big challenge. People are, the biggest taboo in people is sex, money, death. So if
Mm,
anyone indulges in any of these, they start to feel very afraid, or they start to judge that teacher a lot. Like there are teachers in India who used to experiment a lot on death, on dead bodies
mm,
and all that. Now in science, they have always experimented on dead bodies and no one questions them. But
right.
when a spiritual, right, yeah, and when a spiritual teacher is sitting next to a dead body, they start to question that why is he doing that? Only because we don't understand that language, and we start to judge that. But if Osho experimented with 95 Rolls Royces and all of that, he could be having private jet. He could be doing whatever he wants to do as his personality. But we also, and all these people, they have not read, any of his books. They just read the,
Mm.
a blog, they watch that 2-hour documentary, and they make the judgment. So there's so much I want to say. uh, but yeah, I will not make this podcast about spiritual teachers, because because then I'll
No,
share
because
everything here,
yeah,
and then I'm
I
like,
know. But I had that question before because I was like, I want to talk about poetry, and I want to
yeah,
ask that question to you because actually now when I was like,
yeah,
well, welcome to ommmsome podcast. We have already somehow started. Today I have Chandresh
yeah, I
Bhardwaj.
saw you.
I'm recording.
I saw the moment I saw your recording, I was like, okay, it's on. It's
Yeah, it's
happening.
on. It's always on.
It's always on.
But anyhow, because going from that topic, because when I first met you, which was Instagram, and I was just like writing because you allowed me to introduce yourself as I wish, and I was like, okay, we met on
Fine.
Instagram, and I really loved your poetry, and I remember so well when you messaged me, you were like, oh, have we met in real life? And I was like, no, but like your poetry is super nice.
Right.
And then I was really, really intrigued by you because I couldn't understand this like sensuality. There's like he's sometimes mentioning the word sex, and then there's like a spirituality as well involved. And I was like, he's from LA. He might be from one of those, woo woo. So I had the same, like we were just talking about Osho, like I didn't know you. I didn't know you like for long enough, I suppose, as well. And then
Yeah.
by the time I read your book, I listened to your podcast, and we met just once, but like there had been so much, and it's like, oh wow, like this is a legit teacher.
Thank you, Monta.
Yeah, so
I
thank
rem-
you for all that, and yeah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I remember when we first met, and the first thing I noticed, I felt about you is that this is an authentic seeker. You always come across as a very happy, joyful, but very understanding soul. I know people see you as this playful, happy person, but deep down, you're a very old soul, very ancient soul, very understanding, very mature. And I always know I can reach out to you if I need any suggestion, any advice, any guidance. I have that trust on you. I consider you as not only part of my spiritual tribe, but a very good friend. So I know I can always count on you. And it's so funny, we met only once, but the understanding we have with each other is so, I'm so grateful for that. uh, because I mean, look at this podcast. I've been messaging you, yep, let's do it, and it's happening after 3 months, but you were not annoyed. I hope, at least you didn't show me that you were annoyed, and I
No.
I loved that space you were giving me. And it was that space and freedom that honestly made me set up this, like, today morning, because I was like, she's been so understanding, and I got to do this, and I knew the questions you will ask nobody else will ask, because you
Mm.
know me, you know my universe. So I was actually selfish to just hear the questions that you have on mind, because I know you'll have some good, like real questions. Yeah.
Well, let's start with the poetry, because I
Let's
was
do
also
that.
thinking, in this time when everyone is probably like bombarding you with like, what's the best meditation? What should I do? This, and I was like, let's just talk about something not even different, but something really, really nice. Your love for poetry. When did that start?
Yeah.
Was it like when you were a baby and your parents would
Always. Yeah.
introduce? Yeah.
My father loves poetry, but he doesn't write a lot. He listens to poetry. But my grandfather, he was a very renowned poet in northern India. His books in Farsi, Urdu, they are still, distributed in Pakistan, India, and all of that. I'm not on Wikipedia. My grandfather is on Wikipedia. you know, so he was a very prominent spiritual teacher, very profound, but also his love for poetry was very deep. And I think my father always, used to tell me when I was little that your grandfather gifted me just the spirituality, but he gifted you his both favorite loves, the poetry and spirituality. But I was never trained poet. I wish I was never trained into poetry. I never took that
Can you
seriously.
train a
I
poet or train
they
into poetry?
honestly, like, I think it's how I understand it. It comes from, like, deep, roots of your heart. So if you are connected within, you don't need any training. It's like acting, performing, right? Dancing, music. if it's happening, it's happening. I think the schools and all, they can polish you a little bit. And sometimes I used to think, when I look back at my poetry, I was like, oh my God, this could have been improved, polished. And I do that
Mm.
still. I go back to my poetry, which I wrote 2 years ago, 8 months ago, and I rewrite that, and it has a new flavor. I like that. And it was my biggest, by the way, complex, that I'm not a trained poet. So never called
Mm.
myself a poet also, by the way, only because the moment you label yourself as a poet, people start to have a very clearly defined, like, personality of you. He's a poet. So he has to write like this way. He should be doing it this way. And it happened, when I was a teenager. I went to one, because my grandpa passed away when I was 5-year-old. So I went to one of his very celebrated students, who became a very, big poet in India. And I was a teenager in school in India. So I took my poetry to him. And he used to write for Indian movies and books. And he saw my poetry. He said, "No, there's a touch of your grandfather in this poetry, but you need to polish this and that." And he gave me a lot of laws, the rules of poetry.
Mm.
The rules don't work well with me. I don't know. I was like, I don't want to write with rules. I think I'll lose the meaning of it. So I didn't listen to his advice. I continued to write as I was writing, and it used to be in Hindi. That was my mother tongue. I wrote tons of poetry in middle school, high school. It became a way of just bringing myself out, but I never published it. There was no social media, right? So there was no where should I
Leaflets.
publish on, right? Yeah, I know. I never published it. The first time my trust toward my poetry happened when I was in 11th grade in India,
Mm.
and in Maryland in USA. There was a poetry contest. They said, submit your poetry. If it's selected, we'll acknowledge you, we'll publish you in our book, and so on. So just for fun, I submitted one of my only English poetry. It won the best prize there. So
Oh.
that changed a lot. I was, as a teenager, your ego, you flatter yourself, you are bragging about it with school kids, you're telling everyone. And I was very happy. They sent me the book also, all the way from Maryland to my small town in India. It
Mhm.
was a very cherished gift at that time. And then something happened. One of the friends of my mother was a school teacher in India, a professor. And all her friends were very, strict and rigid, because they all were teachers. My mom has never been strict. She's very cool. But her friend called me up and congratulated me. And she said, it's good you're writing poetry, but this is not what you should be doing. This
Mm.
is the age to become doctor, engineer,
Oh,
and
the
all of that.
standard. Damn it.
I know. And she said something. She said, do yourself a favor, lock that poetry book and throw the key in the river and never find it, because not good. You can write poetry, this entire life ahead for you for that. But right now, study, be a doctor, be engineer. And all her kids, I feel sorry for her kids, because they all are suffering right now, becoming doctors and engineers. They're very
Oh.
unhappy. They reach out to me every now and then, telling me how frustrated they are. Uh, but uh, although I did not agree with her, but something happened in my heart. I could not write poetry for 2 years almost, I think.
Mm.
And it just didn't happen. I never opened the diary. And after 2 years, I moved to New York from India. And in New York, the loneliness, the culture shock, uh, missing my family and all of that started. And then again, poetry started to come up. But then
What do
Facebook.
you express with poetry? What do you think, like, how could you describe? Because, some people who don't write poetry at all. So what kind of a language, what are you expressing?
There's a sect of poets called Sufi poets.
Mm-hmm.
Sufi poetry. Rumi is a Sufi poet,
Mm-hmm.
right? I I relate myself to the Sufi culture because my grandfather was a Sufi poet. The
Mm.
Sufi poetry looks very romantic, very passionate, very sensual, but it's not written for a human. It's written for the divine consciousness. It's written
Yeah.
for, that divinity. And I could see that divinity in you and write for you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's honoring the divinity in you. It's honoring the divinity that's out there within us, around us. So that's what I do. If I
So
just
would you
express,
say, like, when you were in New York and you started writing again, that love for the divinity was somehow coming out again and on the paper with a pen, or?
as a teenager, I'm sure I was not writing for divinity. As a teenager, I'm sure I was writing just to impress the girls around and impress myself, impress my, gang
Damn
of
it.
boys. Look at me. Yeah. So I used to write all the poetry, and my friends would take that poetry and forward that to their girlfriends and impress them.
Oh.
And it was working. And I was like, so my poetry is not completely useless. It's helping people. It's igniting that love back. And I started having faith in it, but I
Mhm.
also knew that if I write for humans, it's going to bring a lot of pain, because when you write for a human, you expect something. The mind
Mm.
expects the love back. And I feel they are not obligated to return that love. If they return, amazing. If they don't, that should not bring me suffering. And as a teenager, as a boy in early 20s, that was happening a lot. When you love to a deeper extent, then your mind will obviously want that love back. And I very quickly I realized, if I express this intense depth of love to a human, they may get it, they may not get it, but my mind may start expecting that I
Mm.
should be getting equal or at least similar kind of love from them. And when that was not happening, it was bringing a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. And and my father, as a spiritual guru, he told me one thing. He said, you have a very deep, sensitive heart. And as a boy, I didn't want to admit it. Now I admit I'm very comfortable with the sensitivity of my heart.
Mm.
In those days, I didn't want to acknowledge that I have a sensitive heart.
Not
And
in
he
New
said,
York City at that time.
exactly, right, it's not made for sensitive hearts. So I knew I need to change the expression of my poetry. If I continue to write for humans, um, it's going to be challenging, because every human is going through their own story. They're going through challenge, so they're using the poetry to heal themselves. And
Mm.
then my mind is like, okay, now you healed yourself, can you return back this love a little bit? And if it's not happening, I'm going to feel used, I'm going to feel painful. And as a teenager, as a boy in early 20s, you experience a lot of heartbreaks, and you're like, the world is bitter. And it was making me depressed, sad, and unhappy. And I knew I need to change the expression of my poetry. I still want to write the way I write, but the receiver has to be different. And it was
Mm.
also the same time my spiritual journey was going through a very intense a journey. Um, so somewhere my love for the divinity started developing on a very deeper level. It was the second phase of my spirituality. The first phase was fun, frolic, and all joy. But when I lost my sister and my best friend, then I took a break to understand that everything I knew about God was wrong.
Mm.
I need to shift my relationship toward the godliness. And then the second phase, I was a little more open and understanding. And then my poetry also started changing.
Do you
um,
remember,
but
like,
yeah, it's that these are the
something from
initial times of
before,
my
and
poetry.
do you remember something from before and after this, like how maybe some verse from your poetry, how it changed? Do you remember?
Yeah,
What would you write?
I remember I was in college, and started using the word, God, divinity. And in Urdu they call, so in Urdu they call, Khuda, Allah, and all those words. So I started using them, and I was clearly seeing the shift, that I'm using these, like, deeper words. And they are not
Mm.
Hindu words, they are like based in Sufi traditions, Muslim traditions. And that's when I also started watching Rumi's work, Hafiz, a lot of these international poets. My grandfather's work is all in Farsi and Arabic and Urdu, and some of his students translated that for me in Hindi, so I was able to really understand that he was writing the same way. So that kind of made me feel very validated, that okay, that's what he has done, and that's probably why I'm feeling that urge also. And it I always say that in my in my podcast, in my talks, that you got to develop a relationship with the deities, with the divinity.
Yeah,
If there's
you
no
get a lot.
relationship, it's not going to work out. So it developed my relationship with the divinity. um, and yeah, that's these are the initial periods, the phases of my poetry when it changed a lot of expression.
That's so interesting that you're saying about, like the purpose, how you write to people or to divinity, because I would always wonder about, Rumi's poetry. I could read it and I'm like, how does this make me feel so deep? And I can be just like reading one verse and I was like, I'm crying. Like it's such energy. And I don't
Right.
know what's happening, but it's like now when
Yeah.
you're saying this, would you say because they wrote it for the divinity? That's why it's so strong energetically.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. I feel Rumi healed himself through the poetry. Rumi was a very deeply profound spiritual man. Uh, and I think he channeled that spirituality through poetry in the later years of his life also. Um, and I see that, the way they write, it's written for that, level, for the higher realms of consciousness. Because if you watch the journey of poets who write for their lovers, it gets pretty toxic. They are drinking a lot. They are, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it gets pretty toxic. And I saw that in my, younger days,
Mm.
that there is a lot of toxic energy in the poets. They're drinking, smoking, just being very nomadic. They don't aimlessly writing and just. And I was like, this is another kind of drug. It's a psychological drug to just write for someone and expecting for them to return that love, or keep like obsessing over them. I didn't want that to happen, because it was happening to an extent, and it was bringing me a lot of pain. But I'm very grateful for that time, because that pretty much changed how I understood my life. And I knew I don't want to be this person ever again. I want to be a much deeper, wiser, or a mindful person, toward my pains, my joys, my highs, and my lows. So poetry is a huge gift, in that sense for me.
Recently I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about poetry and they said, like big artists, painters, they want to copy someone. They're like, oh, I want to be like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and something. But poets, they always want to be unique. They don't want to be set like
Yeah,
you don't want to hear us like, oh, your poetry is like Rumi's. You're like, no, is that true? Do you
kind
experience
of.
that?
I
Yeah.
I experienced that. I and I experienced that in every other sense also, not just in poetry, even in spirituality. Like when I was growing up, not growing up, like when I started my work, the students of my father would compare me to him, or people who knew Deepak Chopra, they're like, oh, you're like Deepak. People who knew Osho, they're like, oh, you talk like Osho. So huge compliments. They're huge teachers. But I was like, I want to be Chandresh Bhardwaj. Why is it so tough for you to accept that? And I was also in my 20s, so there's a lot of hot blood, like in you, and you're like, no, I am who I am. Do not compare me to these teachers. And in poetry, it of course it happens, and you have to be fearless and shameless when you write your poetry, because if you write too carefully, you will miss the point, I think. um, I clearly know I do not follow the grammar rules, the punctuation, and I don't want to do that. The reason I have not published a poetry book is because the publishers are still looking for a safe route.
Mm.
They still want the poetry to be written in a certain manner, unless like you go viral, and then they want you in their catalog. But if you approach them with a proposal that it's my first poetry book, they would want you to play super safe. And
What are they
I don't
expecting
want
these
to.
days? Because
I mean,
there's
they only expect one thing: how many books it will be
mm,
sold. So they
okay.
want celebrities jumping in. They want you to write in a certain way, which could be like, if you see my poetry, I do not put periods or commas in most of them. I don't use capitalized words.
Is
I
that
keep it
still
all.
important? Where?
It's it it it's not important once you go viral.
Mm,
It's important when you are starting out. So, and I know I have seen the difference. When I started out, people would point out, oh, you're not writing the periods, there's no commas and stuff. Now nobody does that. And I don't like it. It should be received equally when only
mm,
5 people are reading it. It should not change when numbers change from 5 to 500 or 5,000 or million, right? And that's a sad thing. And this is why I have not published my second book as well. I will at some point. But the whole circus around the publishers, it's draining. And I want to connect with publisher who will give me free hand. And they don't, and they should not be looking for the celebrities and all of that jumping in and endorse my book, because that's the only conversation everyone is having. Can you again bring Dalai Lama on board? Can you again bring
mm,
Deepak Chopra? Can you bring these people in Hollywood? And the love for the poetry is lost, because then you are busy in calling and pitching and
yeah.
bringing, and I don't enjoy taking
You should
favors for
channel
this work.
Rumi for the pre.
Yeah, I know when I write the book, it's going to be, I want it to be just, like my personal affair, right? It
Mm,
has to be such a sacred, intimate set of the words, where I don't want to bring anyone to endorse it. It should be what
mm,
it is. That's what I want. And I think many times, to just self-publish it. Why not?
yeah, that would be
Uh,
beautiful.
right?
How
But
how are you perceived
yeah.
and your poetry in India and with your parents and your family? Because I mean, it's like a mixture of sensual and there is there's a lot of sexual, sensual, a lot of spiciness.
I think it's more sensual. I try not to make it sexual. Because I feel that's very momentarily, like
Mm,
that stays for in my old poetry. You will see a lot of, probably a lot of feminine context, in the old ones. I write the word in the old ones, her, like her, her intensity, her something, like it was
mm,
clear it's written for her. And then I started changing that also. I was like, in her there is divinity, and divinity does not have a gender. It should
mhm,
not be. So I started changing that. um, and there I don't want it to be sensual. It becomes sensual because, what is sensuality? It's, you know accepting and embracing all the senses that you have, and when that happens, it just finds its own playfulness. And I think when a human is released from all the chains, from all the ideas of right and wrong, they become wild. They
mm,
are wild for a while. Before they become truly sage like Buddha, they're wild for a while, because they need to release all of that, energy. They're holding it back for so long. So that's why I think there's a touch of sensuality. But if you are a sexual person, you will feel that sexuality also, right? Because we read, based on our own energy also. And speaking of how my friends or family reacts, uh, they don't. I don't
I
know if
know.
they read. I don't know if they read. I'm happy they're not reading, because yeah, I don't want my cousins, like all the family people, read each and every word, because they see me as a different guy, right? I'm
Mm,
their, like, brother, nephew, son, friend, and all of that. So they don't they like it, they praise it, and if it's like really intense, they'll drop a comment
mm.
that, oh my god. But they never ask me the process. I think it's I'm sure they're a little uncomfortable about it. They're like, what
Then
should
if
we
we
ask?
look at like Rumi's, that's I mean, like there's a lot of, hardcore sexuality text kind of, but it's like you said, it's for
Yeah,
divine. But like in a text, if you read, it's like, oh wow, it's like, and he wrote that. What was that, 13th century or earlier?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's
yeah.
so brave.
Very brave. Ancient poets were very brave.
I
For
never I
them.
never thought of that, but then you when just
Yeah.
you read it and it's like, oh wait, because like we speak about Osho. Osho is like, oh wow, in '70s
Mhm.
saying the word out loud, sex. That was like, but then like look at Rumi, it's like,
Exactly. I have seen that bravery in Rumi. I've seen that in many other ancient poets in India. I've seen that with my grandfather, who grew up in a very small village. His poetry had a lot of sensuality, a lot of passion,
Mm.
and that's the first thing I noticed in him, because he was the first one that I, like read that deep. I was like, he's so brave. He grew up in such a small village, and I cannot imagine how people must have reacted to his words. And then I was, soon introduced to Rumi and other people. I'm like, all these old ancient poets, they were brave, because in the ancient times, your creativity was an act of rebellion.
Mm.
Creators, the poets, the artists, if they did not rebel, they were not considered a true artist. So for them, it was a natural form of expression. To rebel, was how, that's just how the poetry came out. And it's a very strong element in me. Like, if I start rebelling against a certain system, authority, or ideas, I can
The
write for
poetry.
days. Yeah, and that brings me so much, like, I don't know, fulfillment. And I used to think maybe I was a revolutionary in my past life, because I feel very strongly when someone is chained, someone is like, if their expression is blocked, I feel triggered.
Mm.
And the only biggest arguments, or these kind of moments have happened with me, they have happened in a religious institution. Because if I see they're trying to suppress somebody's expression, I would lose my calm. And that's the only time I lose my calm. It takes a lot to piss me off, but when I see your expression is blocked, it just, then I lose my
Turned
calm.
into lion, huh?
Yeah, I think so. I think something happens, and I try to manage that in a very, very conscious way. uh, yeah.
I can't imagine you that way, but probably with all the I imagine with the women and suppressed like temples and something, you might get a little bit or a lot mad.
Yeah, I mean, it has happened many times. And this was one thing that my spiritual teacher told me. Like, my father always told me, your biggest flaw is that, your short temperedness, your anger. You got to tame it, you got to channel it.
Mm.
And for a while, I was proud of that anger, but I also started feeling it's not going to serve me. It's not going to bring any healing or happiness out of me. So I started changing that. And now I would be angry, like, I don't know, once in 2 years, once in a year, but it only happens when, again, I see that, somebody's expression is suppressed, or if an authority is trying to really, like, abuse you or tame you, I would lose my calm. The last time it happened, I was in a Tantra temple in India, and it is one of the biggest temples. And the cops there, they were trying to push women that, you can't stand there, and they pushed her. And the moment they were like being very rude, but the moment they pushed her, oh my God, I don't know what happened. I still don't know what happened. My voice, my eyes, everything changed, and I started yelling at them. And I was planning to be in that temple for
Not in a
years.
poetry.
There was no poetry happening. It was something else happening. A poetry of some other, dimension was happening. So they sent a message to the wireless, describing me, that this guy is coming out of temple. You got to, just stop him, because he's being rude with us. And then the priest of the temple, he was like, they will put you in too much trouble. Let me get your affair. So he helped me, and I realized it could have gone terribly wrong that night. Uh, but I just could not stop myself. And when my father got to know, and all that, he was very upset. He was like, you should not be doing that in a temple. These cops, I mean, they could do anything. But I don't know it. But that's something I'm still, like, it happens, as I said, once in once in a year or so, if it goes really beyond my control. But yeah.
So beautiful to see that you're human too, sometimes. And I think many people will, who just read your poetry or just see your Instagram, it's just like, oh my gosh, he's a Tantra teacher. He must be like this all the time. And, like very,
um,
very
I
zen.
go through, yeah, I go through all the seasons, and that's why I encourage everyone that go through all the seasons of your life, right? Do not suppress any part of you, because if
Mm.
you're suppressing your anger, then you cannot express your love also fully. We hold back the anger, and then you also hold back the love. So if I'm getting angry every day, I got to channel it. It doesn't mean that if you're angry, be proud of it and keep getting angry. So
Mm.
if it's happening to me once in a year, once in a 2 years, it doesn't mean I'm not upset at other times. I am, but I channel that, let's say if somebody's coming home to fix my internet and they don't show up for like 5 times, right? Would that make me upset? Yes. But would I be losing my calm and yelling? No. In these things, I'm really able to, I channel the compassion. I try to understand things from their point of view. But if only and only if I see someone is abusing someone's fundamental right to live, to express, that's where I feel I need to step in. But I would do it with utmost respect and love. But anger only happens when I feel I'm losing control. I'm not proud of it when that happens, but I know that's the human side of me, and I again channel it. So I know that whole temple thing will not be repeated in my life because I learned my lesson, and I would deal with it very differently next time.
Be
But that's
careful
how
if you
you
go to
learn, right?
temples with Chandresh.
No, I have a lot of fun in temples, so yeah.
Oh, it's so sweet. You wouldn't survive without a temple.
I know, right? And
Yeah.
that's what concerned me. I was like, I these are my charging points. I should not
Mm,
be angry here. And but I knew what made me angry also. So I was like, no, this is one thing I need to
mm,
understand and channel even deeper. This is one department I need to deal with it differently. That's where
mm,
my tantra work, my poetry helps me, because I can bring change by doing the real work. By
mm.
getting angry, nothing is going to
Not
change.
dealing with the cops, but writing a book, right?
Yeah, I mean, nothing changed that day for them, nothing changed. But if I had written something powerful or published it somewhere, that
Mm,
might have changed even 0.5%. So, and this is how my writing also started. I started writing to bring a certain change, to bring a certain rebelliousness in people, rebelliousness with awareness. That's what I wanted to create. And that's where my journey is heading, I feel, honestly. Without expression of your rebellious spirit, I think your creativity is not completed,
mm.
at least
What
for
would you,
me.
yeah, what would you say actually for those, sometimes people are like, oh, I got my like creative block, like I can't write or I can't write poetry. Do you have any like little tip or something that you can, because I think you just also touched on a point and like if you like push a little bit, you want to change, you want to do something. And I think what you said before about writing for Divinity, those are amazing tips.
You know, I want to quote two people here. One of them is Seth Godin. He's not a spiritual teacher. He's a marketing guy, but he talks like a spiritual teacher.
Mm.
I'll text you his name. You should also read his books and his lectures.
I've
Wonderful
heard of him
guy.
probably from Instagram.
Yeah, he's so wonderful. Very, very smart guy, Seth Godin. And second one is Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is an author. He's husband of Amanda Palmer, who's a very beautiful singer. So Neil and Seth Godin, they have very interesting view on writer's block.
Hmm.
So I'm going to start with what Seth Godin said, because it aligns with my views completely. He said, uh, you will never hear a plumber, telling you, I have a plumber's block, I cannot fix your bathroom today. He said, if you're going for a surgery and a doctor shows up and he's like, I have a doctor's block, I can't do your surgery, your stomach is open, but you know what, I can't do it today. uh, I have a doctor's block. He said, why only writers come up with this? It's writer's block. He said, it's your job, it's your duty. And he's a guy who has written a blog every single day, Monta, in all these years, even when blogs lost the
Wow.
respect. Yeah, he
Yeah.
has been writing a blog every single day. And it made complete sense, because whenever I had that so-called block, it was not it's a respectful way of calling it a block, but it was laziness. It
Mm.
was, I was distracted, I was lazy, I didn't want to write. And then somebody says, oh, it's a writer's block. It made me feel good. Oh, nothing
Oh
is
yeah.
wrong with me, it's writer's block. So I paid very close attention to that, teaching that nobody else has a block. Like in this COVID-19,
I love it.
in this pandemic, if any doctor say, I can't treat patients today, I have a doctor's block, or essential worker says, I can't go to grocery store, I have this grocery block, nobody says that. It's it's you owe it to your creativity, you owe it to the grand scheme of universe.
Mm.
So I have stopped calling it any kind of block. I take responsibility of it. When I'm not able to write, I take responsibility. I'm tired, I'm lazy, I'm not interested maybe, so I need to recharge myself. I could
Mm-hmm.
do that by listening to music, meditating, having tea, or doing anything that brings back that strength. Music plays a huge role for me. When I feel I'm not getting any creativity, I play a song that could really take me to a different dimension.
Mm.
And within 2 minutes, I have to stop the song because it brings back that element, and then I start writing. And then other writer Neil Gaiam, he has a very beautiful approach to it. He said when he goes through a block, he stops writing, and he does nothing at that time. He doesn't listen to music, doesn't watch TV, doesn't like text or talk to a friend. He just sits, and that's all. He said when you just sit and not doing anything, in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, you will start to feel bored of sitting, and then your love for the writing will pull you back. And that also works for a lot of people. But the first step is stop calling it a writer's
Mm.
block,
That's
or a
beautiful.
poet's block, and take responsibility that you are human. You could be lazy, you might be uninterested today. It's okay. Shut off the laptop, go for a walk. uh, and you have to really, I treat the poetry as something which channels through me. I'm not writing it, I'm channeling
Mm-hmm.
it. And I owe that to that higher power who's channeling. It's a reverence, it's an act of reverence for that higher power. So when I write something, it's an act of reverence to that higher power who's speaking through me. And if I'm not showing up for them just because I'm lazy, that doesn't sound good to me.
Mm.
So when I it's a meditation act for me when I write, because I know I'm honoring that higher power. And pretty much every poetry that I've written, it's written in the meditation, like I'm sitting on the cushion when I write
Mm.
it. uh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking because sometimes I would also say to myself, like, well, I would just feel it. I'm like, oh, today I don't feel like it, but it's probably what you're saying. I'm just like, I'm tired, or like if I'm channeling, then I'm just not like this body is not in the level of channeling. Like it's
Yeah, that,
somewhere
that that's okay,
distracted
right?
by something, and you need to get back to that. However you put yourself into that zone or
Mm,
creativity or flow.
exactly. Because this is a work that requires a lot of effortlessness. If
Mm-hmm.
and I never noticed it, but now that I'm telling you that I write all the poetry sitting on my meditation cushion, uh, and I think I'm able to write it at that time only because I have meditated.
Wow.
I'm relaxed, I'm more receptive, I'm available to what is opening up, and then I write the words. uh, and for me, that sensual expression that shows up, it's really, I'm responding to the energies around me, nothing
Mm.
more. So I'm not trying to project something there. It's really what's showing up. Um, and I just try to put that in words.
How does your poetry or your writing or whatever you're expressing, podcast or a post, how does it change depending on what people you're, surrounded with or being in touch with? Or do you
Uh,
keep your circle really tight?
can you say it again? Because your voice was disconnected.
So how does your poetry or your work, your podcast, whatever you bring out or channel through, how does it change depending on who you hang out with, who you spend your time with,
Uh,
or do you keep your circle like really close?
uh, I have always kept my circle really close, but I have always kept a circle of non-spiritual, non-poets. They have nothing to do with my world of spirituality or poetry, and I love that because they bring a different perspective, right?
Mm.
Uh, so they don't influence my writing. The what influence my writing or speaking is what I'm feeling in that moment. So when I do my talks, I arrive a little early, and I sit down at the back of the room with the audience, and I just meditate there for 5 minutes. I want to feel what's happening in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And then I start talking based on what I'm feeling. um, and it's same for the writing. I have tried writing based on what others want to listen, probably, or what others need. And that did not work out well for me, because you can never read what others want. If you can read, there will be no movie that will be flop, right? There will be no book that's not doing well, because everybody will know what others want, and then they start writing it. I genuinely feel we don't know what we want
Mhm.
until it shows up. Like, I don't know what kind of poetry I want to read until it shows up on some blog or some book, and then I'm like, oh my god, I never thought of it this way.
Mm.
And that's what I hope to create, that I write the poetry which makes you think, I never thought of it this way. Like, there's a poetry, this is many years ago, I wrote a poetry that I could swallow a moon for you, and give life to flowers or
I
something,
remember that.
right? And I know nobody could swallow a moon, but
I can
in
imagine.
my in my poetic world, I would like that to happen. Somebody is just eating the moon because they want to show their intensity to someone.
Mm.
So I just respond to whatever crazy stuff is happening. But my friends, that circle of friends, keep me light and easy, because
Mhm.
if I live with my world, it could get extremely intense and maybe dark also.
Mhm.
So when I talk to my school friends and all, we crack jokes on random stuff. We never discuss my work or their work, unless one of us is in trouble. Then we talk about it, that
Yeah.
this is happening. But we never discuss that. And I love that. I don't hang out with the spiritual community, because there's too much of crystal, Reiki, universe conversations happening.
Oh,
They
I
don't
forgot my
excite.
beads.
I'm wearing mine.
Oh, that's good. So we're safe.
Yeah, one of us, yeah, is wearing it. It makes this space very safe, right?
Oh.
Yeah, and you should try that, Monta. Like, hang out. I don't know if you already do that, but when you hang out with people who have nothing to do with your world, they'll treat you as a human. And
Mhm.
it's such a liberating feeling when you are treated as a human and
That's why I
not as
like to curse, because they don't expect that. When they hear me cursing, they're like, oh, she curses. I'm like, yep, a lot.
right. I've never heard you cursing, but but I know you are so raw and real. So, and if it's your expression, you go for it. you know
Mhm.
Whatever is in my expression, I've always tried to just go with it. And people ask me, you are vegan, is it because you are born in a family of gurus, you don't curse? Is it because you are in family of gurus? But to be honest, nothing has to do with the family of gurus. I mean, my guru never even told me to meditate, because he
Mm.
wanted that to develop very organically, very naturally. And I'm glad it happened. And I asked him, what if I would never meditated? What if that never happened? He said, that's okay. There's always next lifetime.
Oh.
So this is the kind of people I'm surrounded with.
Mm.
They give me that expression, they give me that freedom. And that's why I want to do that for others, give
Mm.
them that freedom.
Freedom and acceptance, eh?
So important. And I know the reason I connect with you so effortlessly is because we give each other that breathing space, that acceptance and freedom. you know and that's probably what clicked for us. I don't even know for how long we have been friends, but it feels like many years, but I know it's not. Yeah,
Feels those lifetimes.
exactly.
I
Right.
mean, like connecting and being on Instagram and seeing like what you're doing, and then like, yeah, I think it's the time actually, because it's like it's not just like, oh, he's just a poet. It's like, no, he does this, he does that. Oh, he's in this space, that space. Oh, I just remembered a question: Do we need darkness, or do poets need darkness to write a good poetry? Because you mentioned that darkness feel like like.
It depends what kind of art you want to create, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel there is darkness present in every human being, just the way we have light and nighttime, we have day and night, darkness and sunshine. The same way within us there is darkness and there is light. There is rainy season, there is snow season, everything is happening within. If you escape that particular season of darkness, you will miss out on some very important points. So it's important that you witness the the light, if you, and the darkness in the same lens. you
Mm.
know I plan to publish this poetry today after our podcast, and it's about darkness. I'll actually read that for you because
Yay!
it's a very like just 2 lines, but it talks about um, importance of darkness. And I wrote that right after I meditated,
Mm,
and there's something that shows up in the meditation for me, and it keeps taking me back, to that uh, dark part of who you are. And I don't see dark as negative. I see
mm,
dark as natural as light. So it says, bow down to the unwanted parts of you, witness their root, know their story, and let your darkness be the guiding light in your awakening.
mm,
And I totally believe that. Let your darkness be your guiding light. I wanted to connect darkness as your guiding light in the same sentence because I truly experience it not only within me, but with the students I work with. I want to understand their darkness.
mm.
I want to
It's very
understand what.
deep. It's like whenever I've talked about, like I would sometimes call it depression, or like, or the dark periods of life when you go through, but it's the depth of that, or like what we were saying, like sometimes writing poetry. I remember writing to this one of my boyfriends. It was so deep, and it's like, wow, I've never written like this because I was in
Mhm,
so much pain as a human
mhm,
being. But the depth, like you can be like unicorns, happiness, this, but when you're in pain and you write a poetry, it's like, whoa, I'm like, what is this? And it wasn't like angry, it was just like this huge longing, this wanting, this like, but it's like full, like I'm showing, like it's your whole body, like you're
right.
overtaken by that. And it's beautiful.
Exactly.
The depth, like maybe not being there and being like, so intense, but the depth of it is just like, wow.
Yeah. You know, the reason is we are so conditioned to live on the surface. Our parents,
Mm,
our society, our religion, they teach us, they condition us, they brainwash us to live on the surface. Because if you're not living on the surface, then you might be touching some very crazy depths of you,
oh
and it scares everyone. It scares the parents, it scares the religion, it scares the society, government, everyone. Why this person is becoming a little too intense for this
yeah.
environment. So when you're going through any intensity, any deep longing, then the expression will be powerful. um, I have seen the most, sweet, calm, subtle human beings becoming very, very wild when they're given the freedom to be wild. It's in them. They
Mm,
just need a safe space to channel that wildness. And it doesn't have to happen in front of my eyes, but it needs to happen. I encourage that, I encourage this in everyone I know. You got to be in that wild zone, and it does not have one template. For some people it could mean, dancing. For some people it could mean writing. For some people it could mean something else. But let that, suppression release you. It will release in its own way. And try not to depend on somebody else for that.
yeah.
If
No.
you depend on somebody else, that's not going to work out well.
Now you're speaking to my heart. No,
Right.
because you're just
Yeah.
like, I have, talked with people about this, like just the depth of that, the depth of feeling, how you feel, how you express and all that. And it's like, that's like when you feel it's worth living. And you just said it so perfectly about the surface level. We're so used to that comfort surface when you're like, you're okay with everyone here. But it's like, here is great, and here is great as well. It's
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
so
Yeah,
important.
that's a big challenge in the humanity. Everyone wants to stay on the surface, and that's why they are suffering. That's why anxiety
Mm.
and the pain is building in them, because they are on surface.
Oh my gosh, this is so lovely. I would talk with you for hours, but you probably have a tight schedule.
It's okay. Any questions you have, I can listen. I can. Do you have any questions that you wanted to ask and could not?
Oh, I had one, but it's like totally off towards Tantra side.
Let's
I
do
think
that.
it was a question for, well, okay, two questions. What do you think you have changed so far when it comes to Tantra? Because you were a rebel there as well.
You know, if I have to be extremely honest, I feel I'm really just starting out. It took me 12 years to say that I'm starting out, because if you had asked me this question a year ago, even 6 months ago, I would have said I have not done anything yet. I'm still brewing it, still cooking it,
Mm.
because that's the depth of Tantra. In the first 6, 7 years, my biggest complaint was no one is listening. I feel I'm holding the mic speaking, people are sitting, but they're not listening,
Mm.
as if they don't see me. I truly felt nobody is interested in the real depth of Tantra. In the last few years, I've seen people are opening up. But I can tell you, the real stuff that needs to be changed, it has not fully happened, but the spark, I'm starting to see the spark. Um, and this is something I shared with my guru last year, that it's not happening. I feel I've not started what I wanted to start with Tantra, and it makes me frustrated and so on. And I want to share what he told me. He said, what makes you frustrated, about Tantra not, happening the way you want it to happen? I said, I left the job in Wall Street. I'm doing this work for the last 12 years or so. It should have happened by now that people are actually practicing the right Tantra. He said, first of all, who told you that you started this mission? He said, when I was of your age, I used to think the same. I left my job, and I started this mission. When it will happen? And then he said, I started paying attention to your grandfather's journey, and it was actually him who started this mission. And then he said, my grandfather said, no, I didn't start it. Your great grandpa started it. And
Mm.
he said, what you're doing, it's happening from the last 700 years in our own lineage itself. And imagine the work of all the gurus and teachers who exist beyond our lineage also. So it's not a work of one Chandresh Bhardwaj. You are one element in the whole mission, and you got to do your bit. You cannot be, expecting or demanding that it should change, in 10 years. If it could have changed in a few years, it would have changed. It has taken hundreds of years. Those gurus, did the work so that you could run. They were able to walk so that you could run, and now you are running, so you got to be grateful. And it made me so humble. It just took away all the
Wow.
aggression and disappointment that it's not even my work. So I'm not the one doing it, I'm not the one changing it. I'm just a medium, and I'm beyond grateful to be that medium. So that's where I am
Mm.
right now.
That's beautiful. Where would you see me as a medium?
You are already a medium. I
in
feel
in which little space of I don't have a lineage.
you don't
Mm.
everyone has a lineage, like you may not be aware of it right now.
Mm.
It's not a coincidence, it's not by accident you are doing what you're doing. I feel you're channeling the expression of your ancestors, your
Mm.
the women in your ancestors, the women in your families who wanted to do what you're doing. They could not do it, and now you were given the same task that they were given. But
Mm.
good for you, you started responding to it. And this is the reason why certain women in your family may not understand you very well right now. Or this is the reason why you also keep feeling the pull to expand your strength, expand your light. You have gone through so many layers. And I want to know, who was your great grandma, because from her I can actually connect all the dots, because you are speaking her expression. I promise you, it's the way you are, Wanta. It's not by accident. It's not that you woke up one morning and like, okay, my career in acting didn't work out, so I'm going to be a healer now. So it's not by accident. It's
Mm.
a lot of forces have joined. What I would tell you, don't analyze it, but celebrate what's happening and
Mm.
just keep showing up for it.
Yeah, I am doing that, and it's a beautiful force. And I'm just what I said before is just every day. Okay, let's just get back to not get back, but let's just keep on that being in the flow, in a, like you were saying, like the meditation.
Mm,
Because I also like everything that I've done is just pure after meditation. My journal, it's like I don't think of the things I do or how I have to do them. They're just like there
mm,
after meditation. It's a pure flow. And yes, well, Latvian women have I think my ancestors are pretty strong. We're toughies. We're tough cookies. And I
You are.
recently just get to know that my grandma was born near Ural Mountains. Like, she's Latvian, but she was born in these mountains. So I was like, wow, like that's so amazing.
I'm telling you, I didn't even
Mm,
know about your grandma, but see, you already validated that point. What you're doing, you're living their expression, the
mm,
expression they could not live, the dreams they could not fulfill. You are fulfilling their voice. So receive that honor, welcome that. And when you welcome that, a humbleness comes in that it's not
mm,
my mission. It's a bigger mission. You're one of the soldiers in the army, and it's going to happen because then you start to receive their strength and blessings also.
mm. That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And is there any way we, as listeners to this podcast or following you on Instagram, can support you? What is the biggest support we can give to you now?
you know Biggest support you can give me now is, be a devoted student of consciousness. Everyone wants to find the right teacher. Nobody wants to become the right student. So be the devoted student of your divinity, whatever it is: yoga, tantra, meditation, anything. Give your heart and soul to it. Do not look for the shortcuts. That will be the biggest support. Because today I'm recording the Spiritual Teachers podcast, right? And it's one of the messages I want to give to everyone. That would be, so powerful, and that's the biggest support you can give me, because it would inspire me to even, be a deeper student of, my layer of consciousness. And do join my podcast. That's the second, support. On my podcast, I share a lot of stuff that, Monta tapped into.
Oh, I love
But
it.
nobody tapped into the, yeah,
It's like a
nobody tapped
cherry
into
on top of
poetry.
my. Really?
Yeah, so I'm so happy you.
Losers.
I'm so happy you asked about the poetry, because oh my god, it's such a
I had to
deep.
somehow pitch you for the podcast, Chandresh.
The moment you said poetry, I'm like, okay, great. No one has touched that. It would be so awesome. I know.
Oh, I love you so much. Virtual
I love
hug to
you.
you.
I love you. You know that.